teach us, what's that skill when someone's selling, but they're not really selling? You don't feel like you're kind of being sold to.
There's a lot of bad blood, bad vibes out there about sales. Where I think we go wrong is that we're pushing a product. Our definition of sales is very simple. It is helping people make progress in their lives, which means I'm listening very carefully to you, and always at a moment's notice, we will pivot to the exit and say, Ryan, we're not the right fit for you. Let us get someone who is.
Tell me a story about your biggest objection and the process you use to get beyond it.
Oh boy. So
well, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Gridiron and Growth Podcast. I am your co-host, Bennie Fowler, along with my other co-host, Ryan Harris. And today we are here with a very special guest, Craig Wortmann, a very good friend of mine, a business partner of mine, a professor at Northwestern, a former professor at the University of Chicago, Booth, the builder of the Google Sales School, an incredible entrepreneur, a venture capitalist, one of the most incredible people that I've ever been around, Craig Wortmann. Craig, welcome to the show, my friend.
Wow. Can we end it here? That's enough. That's perfect. Let's just end it right there.
No, man. No, this is something that Ryan and I have been super excited about. I mean, Craig, you and I have gotten a chance to know each other probably over the last 6 months, and we've had incredible conversations. And now a student of yours, but also a business partner of yours, just with everything that you've done at Sales Engine. So would love to dive in terms of just who you are. Would love to start with your story of how you built Sales Engine, your entrepreneurial journey. But let's start just wherever you want to start, and let's go from there.
Sure. Well, Ryan and Bennie, it's a pleasure to be here. And I've got to say right off the bat, Bennie, as I've gotten to know you over time, I've learned a heck of a lot, and I'm still learning from you. So thanks. And thanks to you both, Absolutely. You too, Ryan, for this opportunity to chat. I'll make a long story really short. I'm a 3-time entrepreneur. So I went to business school at Kellogg, where I now teach, which is just kind of fun and random. And I got inspired to become an entrepreneur. And it's funny, you two, because I took a very dangerous assumption into my first venture. I was an IBM salesperson. And so I took this somewhat egocentric notion into my first business that, hey, at least I know one thing. I know how to sell. And it turns out I was entirely wrong, because big company sales is so different from little tiny company sales that they call the wonderful chaos of time zero when you start a business. And so I started a business. It was a disaster of my own making. I own every piece of that disaster, but it really started me on this journey. It's paradoxically, it made me fall in love with entrepreneurship. I really had to figure out how this worked. So I went to a second business. I was very lucky after a disaster to get hired as a turnaround CEO. And that sounds lofty. It's not. It was a small company. Which was a disaster. And they turned it around. And I got so interested in the process of turning around this company, which turned out that what they needed was a sales engine. And I remember going home one night as we were getting ready to sell that company successfully. And I said to my wife, who's my partner, I said, I just want to do this over and over. And Sales Engine was born out of that. And so I just love, Bennie, as you know, and Ryan, I love thinking about how to build a revenue engine. What are the people, process, and tools involved? And I just never get tired of it. So that's sort of that's the quick story of, 20 years of stuff.
And you've done that successfully, and you've done that working now with hundreds of companies. I would love to know where you I know personally, but I would love for you to share with the audience, where do you first start when you're getting into a consulting engagement, when you're 30,000 feet view? Yeah. What does it look like to start an engagement when you're talking about building a sales engine for a company?
This is where, folks like you and Ryan, and as professional athletes and obviously successful business people, but I want to key on the athletic thing for a second. This is where our Venn diagrams cross, because I am decidedly not a professional athlete, but our Venn diagrams cross because, Bennie, it's an interesting question, and it's probably a weird answer, but it's the answer. where we start when we walk into Google or a medium-sized company or a tiny little company, what we're looking at first and foremost, all day, every day for a while, is what we call the knowledge, skill, and discipline of the people. How knowledgeable are they? Which interestingly is where most people stop. We start there, and we actually think, and this is, again, going to sound very strange to you and your audience, we believe that's the least important thing. It doesn't mean be dumb. Of course, we need to be smart, knowledgeable business people. Of course we do. But that's the price of entry. Then the question becomes, how skilled are you and how disciplined are you? And this, Bennie, quite frankly, this is something I've learned a lot about from you as your experience. People like you and Ryan, and as you grew up and your experience on and off the field, everyone can draw really powerful insights into, okay, how did you develop your skill? Not just the knowledge of the game or the knowledge of business. How did you develop your skill? What is skill? How do we label it? How do I know when I walk into this podcast with you two, what skills are required to do a podcast well? What are the disciplines? What does that mean? What is discipline? And how do we manifest it? So I'll stop there, but that's what we look for. And then we build systems and processes and tools around that to codify the knowledge, skill, and discipline of the thing. I guess I'll say one more thing. So, I live and breathe sales, right? So when we walk into a sales organization, again, big or small, doesn't matter. We look at the people and their knowledge, skill, and discipline. And then we say, okay, I'm looking at Ryan, this, 10-year seller. He's been very successful. Why has he been successful? What is his knowledge, skill, and discipline as he tells a story? What is his knowledge, skill, and discipline as he handles a difficult conversation with a client? What is his knowledge, skill, and discipline as he tries to proactively pursue leads to get leads into his business? These are all codified in tools, and we try to pick apart, pull apart, and label the knowledge pieces. That's the easy part. Skill, that's weirder. And discipline, that's just hard.
We know all too well. Well, and I love that you bring up skill, because I tell people all the time, you need a skill, but teach us, what's that skill when someone's selling, but they're not really selling? You don't feel like you're kind of being sold to. What is that skill called, and how do people develop it?
Oh my gosh, I love this question, Ryan. So again, this is something you know a lot about. You speak on mindset. Mindset is both a skill and a discipline. So if we go back to Carol Dweck, one of my favorites, Dr. Dweck, who wrote the book Mindset, one of my heroes, she says very distinctly in that book and in her research, mindset is a choice. We believe at Sales Engine, discipline is a choice. You either got up this morning and worked out or you didn't. It's a choice. You know how to work out. You have the skills of working out. The question is, did you do it or not? Did you eat healthy today or not? It's a discipline. And Ryan, so when you say skill, my brain, rightly or wrongly, hears skill and discipline. I think the skill and the discipline is choosing the mindset by which you enter a sales situation. And now to give you a better answer to your question, I think the first thing we say to clients when we talk with them about Sales Engine, and they may have heard about us or they're interested or we're prospecting new opportunities, is we say, Ryan, the first thing to understand about us is our definition of sales. Our definition of sales is very simple. It is helping people make progress in their lives. That's it. And we believe, again, something you know a heck of a lot about, as does Bennie, that's just a mindset. Our mindset of sales as we enter every situation, whether you define it as a skill or a discipline, doesn't matter, is that we're helping you make progress, which means I'm listening very carefully to you. And if I hear something that you say that's not a fit for me, I have to be the first one to say that. Ryan, that's interesting. I'm starting to understand that we may not be a good fit for you, but I know a gentleman, Bennie Fowler, who would be a better fit for you. May I make an introduction? Because I'm here to help you make progress. It doesn't have to be with me.
Where do most people get it wrong? Do you think they want that tangible transaction? Is that where sales can go bad? Where do people miss that?
I know what this answer is going to be.
Well, I do, Ryan. I think you've put your thumb right on it. And you know what, folks, there's a lot of bad blood, bad vibes out there about sales. I mean, there are a lot of companies that we serve as Sales Engine that are actually allergic to the word sales. They don't like the word sales. They want to be in business development, or they want to be in customer development. And that's fine. It's okay.
Fundraising. Yeah.
I'm very blunt. I call it what it is. It's sales, right? When you're trying to get your child to do homework, you're selling, right? You're persuading. It's selling. You call it what you want. You call it parenting if you want. It's selling. When you're dating, you're selling. So I love this stuff. But I think, Ryan, to try to give a more crisp answer to your question, where we get it wrong is I think salespeople, I know salespeople are well-intended. Are there bad apples? Of course there are. There's bad apples in any bunch. Entrepreneurs, financiers, choose your profession. And sales is not different. Where I think we go wrong, and thus we develop this cultural allergy to the word sales, is that we're pushing a product. I'm going to sell no matter what you want. I mean, Ryan, you need this cup of coffee. You need this laptop. You need this consulting service. I stopped listening to you an hour ago because I know you must buy this from me. That's all push and no pull. We'd rather pull. And it doesn't mean we don't push, because if we're convinced that you do need us, we will push. We'll be aggressive and very aggressive in a good way and pushy. You will transform your business if you do this. We are convinced. And by the way, you didn't ask this question, but I'll share it. We'll put our money on the line. I mean, if we're so convinced, we'll put our fees at risk because we're so convinced that we're right. Because again, we've been listening very, very carefully to you and trying to understand. And always at a moment's notice, we will pivot to the exit and say, Ryan, we're not the right fit for you. Let us get someone who is.
Craig, I appreciate everything that you're sharing. One of the biggest takeaways that since I've known you, is how to practice. And you think as athletes that we would know this and understand this, which we do when it comes to athletics. And I think a lot of people understand it when it comes to athletics, that the importance of practice in terms of getting yourself ready, sharpening your skills as you get ready to go out there for game day, that's ingrained into sports. But in business, in leadership, in selling, there is no practice. Can you talk about where that concept of practice came from in terms of putting it on your calendar to practice your sales skills, your storytelling, the knowledge of your product, and then putting that, and then tying the discipline into the calendar? Can you talk a little bit about that concept? Because you don't hear that in business a lot when it comes to practicing your craft.
I'd love to have you two jump in because you know as much or more, definitely more than I do about this. And I've learned a lot from you, Bennie, about the nature of practice. I will start where you started, which is it is a head shaker to me, you two, that in business forever, we've talked about build high performance teams, build a high performance culture. And as athletes, that is baked into the system. I mean, of course you have to. Of course you have to practice 6 days a week to get to game day, right? And you've taught me that, Bennie. And Ryan, you know that in your bones. Why is it that we talk about that in business, but we don't do it? And again, this goes back to knowledge, skill, and discipline. Knowing and doing are two different things. We know we should eat healthy. We know we should work out. I know I should practice my storytelling before I walk into a CEO's office and practice how to have difficult conversations and practice how to handle objections. I know intellectually I should do that, but we don't build it into our cultures. I find it horrifying and saddening that business is like that. And B, here's the good side, because I am a hopeless optimist. I'm inspired by folks like you, athletic team. Like I'm inspired by professional sports. Who isn't? But I'm inspired in a very specific way, how you practice. So one of the jobs to be done of Sales Engine, of course, and this is, I think, where you're going, Bennie, is we feel it is our mission to bring practice into business cultures, and specifically where our bread is buttered, sales cultures. So as you alluded to, what does that mean? Well, it means that, and this is quite literally true from this week, it's Friday, quite literally true from this week, I acquired a new story. I'm a storyteller. You both know that. I acquire stories all the time. What happens when I acquire a story on Monday and I tell it on Tuesday? I stink at it. It'd be like picking up a tennis racket, never having played tennis, do a backhand. I'd be horrible, right? Because I'm a professional storyteller, but I don't know that story. I just learned it yesterday. I read it in a book. And then I try it. And so what I do is I get a colleague, a coach, what you guys would call a coach. We call them coaches too. I get a coach who happens to be a great storyteller. We go in a private room. I tell the story over and over and over and over. And I get coaching after every rep. And I walk out on Tuesday from that coaching session. I walk into a CEO's office on Wednesday. I crushed that story. And it's not because I'm smart. It's because I'm skilled and disciplined. I've practiced it. I've practiced that move over and over.
What does it look like to craft the proper story? Now, I know we have the 5 C's, and I have the privilege of working with you and understanding that. But I'd love for you to give the audience an overview of the 5 C's. But, Craig, like, is the story too long? Is it too short? What are the key points? How do I elicit the emotion? I would love for you to dive into that.
Guys, coach me here because Bennie knows this is like my favorite subject. I talk for 9 hours on this. So I'm going to talk for a minute and a half, not 9 hours. So the 5 C's. So every story you've heard since you were a child, every story has a beginning, middle, and an end. And while that's helpful, it doesn't really tell you a lot, right? And then on the other end of the spectrum, there's, the hero's journey. There's 12 steps. There's a lot of moving parts. So we try to sort of sales engine, try to meet it in the middle, but a little bit simpler. So there's 5 C's. Every story has a character. That character is put into context. Ryan Harris walked into a room. That's all. We got both, right? Character and context. Then there's conflict. Third C is conflict. Conflict doesn't have to be bad. It can be funny, right? Conflict. Then there's a climax, the aha moment, and then there's closure. So character, context, conflict, climax, closure. As we develop stories, and that does not mean fictionalize. It just means take our stories and I tell a story. I'm Ryan. I'm about to walk onto a stage to give a speech about mindset. And he tells a story. What I would be looking for in that audience as his friend is the 5 C's. Like, oh, he nailed that, right? So that's one. That's the technical piece. The more interesting piece, I think, that's sort of the design elements, the architecture, if you will, of a story. What you brought up, Bennie, is the right thing, which is for some reason, you're detecting a theme here in this podcast, right? For some reason, when we put on business clothes, we err to the very factual nature of that story. This is what happened. This is what happened. And we did this, and then we got these results. And that's fine. That still qualifies as a story. As long as it has those 5 C's, it still qualifies. It's not very interesting. It's not very magnetic because it's not very emotional. And so the emotion of the thing. So we always talk about a story has 5 C's. It also has 2 arcs. The business arc. So train leaves station A, gets to station B. Ryan tells a story from the stage because he's taking the audience from A to B. He's going to get them there and deliver them. Now the more interesting question is when they're looking out the window on that journey, what did they see? What did they feel? What did they experience? That's the up down. So left to right, west to east is the business arc. The emotional arc is north to south. And if you can imagine just a little squiggly line, an arc of a story, character, context, conflict, you imagine that line. If I could take it with my fingers and pinch it and go like this, now I can play with the emotions. And I know I've said this for the 19th time, but I want to be careful with your audience. I am not saying by toggling the emotional line that Ryan is changing the truth of the story. He's not fictionalizing. He's just emphasizing different elements of the story to make the journey more interesting. I'll end with this. We know that when Ryan or Bennie or Craig does that, you are 6 to 7 times as powerful in that moment as anything else you could say. Bennie, our partner, Jeff, always says, if I told you to wear a purple shirt, you'd be 7 times more effective. Would you wear a purple shirt? Probably.
1,000%.
Probably. And that's what we're suggesting.
At least the purple shirt.
It's wrong.
You know what I mean? Yeah. Well, Craig, I want to tie together 2 words that you said in process and objection. Tell me a story about your biggest objection and the process you use to get beyond it.
Oh boy. So I did a deal with a big tech company that's been mentioned in this podcast already about 7 years ago. It was a very large project. They wanted us all over the world, I'll tell the end of the story first. It was a happy ending in terms of we did end up doing the project with them. But in the process of selling that deal, they kept using the word transformation over and over. We want to transform our people. And when I hear that word, that is a very big deal because we're going to have to implement all kinds of systems, do all kinds of stuff. If we're going to actually transform you, rather than just train you for half a day on, the 5 C's of story, there's nothing wrong with that. It's just, that's a very limited scope. And they kept saying transformation. But they also had a very small budget. And so what was interesting is when I went to propose the deal, based on my understanding of the word transformation and everything they had told me, the deal was enormous and they were shocked. And probably not my best move, to be honest, Ryan, but not my best day. And I triggered this huge objection. And so I did some things clearly wrong, which I always do. Even though I've been learning this for 30 years, I'm still doing stuff wrong because I'm still learning. And they were horrified. They really wanted to do business with us. But they said, you are so far out of the ballpark. And you asked me sort of how I handled the objection. And there's a 5-step process for handling objections. And I did an okay job, not perfect, but an okay job at that. And I led with the acknowledgement that I had made an error. And I said, look, it looks like I way overshot this. I was making some assumptions that now I'm understanding might have been wrong. That's on me. Tell me more about where you want to be. And what that first, what we call expert move, Ryan and Bennie did, is it took not all, but most of the steam out of, because they were shocked and like mad. They were like, are you out of your mind? Just took most of it out. What is interesting is it led to a partnership because we met in the middle. I said, look, and I went first. I always say to salespeople, if someone's ghosting you, apologize. If you've just triggered a huge objection, apologize. And sometimes salespeople are like, what do you mean apologize? It's not my fault. I don't care if it's not your fault. One of the best things we can do as human beings in relationships, personal or professional, is apologize. If there's heat, take ownership. In a situation where I made a bunch of other mistakes, that was one thing I got right. One thing led to another. And years later, that deal ended up being pretty close to what the original was, even though we started very small. Because I said, I admit error. Let's start small. My bad. Let's do this. And they are wonderful and came to the table and said, okay, let's do it.
Craig, this is incredible. And I know you have to run. So this is only part one of the conversation. We would love to have you back for a part two in terms of
I hope so.
Covering even more things in terms of leadership, what you did at the Crown and Pritzker Group in terms of the venture capital and being an operating partner. But we want to thank you from the bottom of our hearts for you coming on the Gridiron and Growth podcast. You're an incredible human. And I think there's so much more to tackle in terms of sales engine. And then because we are always in this selling leadership position. I mean, like you said, as parents, as friends, in our companies, the way we show up every single day. So I think there's a lot more for us to unpack. So this is just part one, but really appreciate you coming on the Gridiron and Growth Pod with Ryan and myself.
I would love to go to part two if you folks are willing. And look, it has been a privilege to be with you and to learn with you. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Craig.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Gridiron and Growth. Make sure to shoot us an email at gridirongrowthpod@gmail.com for some questions and sign up for the newsletter that can be found in the show notes. Big special thanks to Big Up Studios and Streamline Media for helping support Gridiron and Growth.